commies and vampires and Satanists, oh my! I'll be answering some questions from listeners about Satanism and communism, as well as questions about Temple of the Vampire. And in answering these, first explaining the difference between Church of Satan policy and personal opinions of Church of Satan members. Also, a reminder that explaining what Satanism is and isn't is not the same thing as telling you how to live your life.
Well, it's not Satan worship, it's Satanism. It's embracing the life-enriching things which have traditionally been given the devil's name. Pride, lust, earthly success, rational self-interest, atheism, humor, nonconformity, science, a passion for living, being selective about whom we love. We don't see these as shameful sins, but empowering ideals. And we also recognize the psychological power and fun of symbolism and aesthetics, so we utilize Satan as mythology's most fitting mascot for what we're about.
Satansplain, Satanic Talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M.
Magister Bill M here with Satansplain. When it comes to the subtopics that I talk about on this show, or answering the questions I get from listeners, I find that sometimes there's both a short answer and a long answer. And time permitting, I think it's good to present both. It's good to have a short answer that answers the question directly, but sometimes that short answer can be easily misinterpreted, or perhaps it does answer the question technically, but the answer is so short that it brings up more questions than it answers. So, trying to find that balance between being direct and being thorough is a challenge I find myself having when I create new episodes of Satansplain. It can be a lot to take in for the listener, so I also tried to make it all easier to take in by splitting parts into chapters and, certain timestamps and putting breaks in between and all that stuff. So, as with every Satansplain episode, feel free to skip around this one, but I do think you'll get the most out of this if you listen from beginning to end at least once. Now, I received a question recently about an organization called Temple of the Vampire. I also received a question asking for my thoughts as a Satanist on Satanism and communism. And I realized that the short answers to these questions, as well as their long answers, actually had some similarities, even though the topics have nothing to do with each other. So let me give you the short answers. Temple of the Vampire. Is this organization part of the Church of Satan? The answer is no. It is an entirely separate organization. It does not even claim to be some form of Satanism. Does the Church of Satan permit its members to have membership, additionally, in the Temple of the Vampire, and vice versa? The answer is yes. The beliefs and practices of the Temple of the Vampire do not inherently go against Satanism, or vice versa. I have friends who are in both organizations. Now, do I personally like Temple of the Vampire? The short answer is no. I personally reject them, to put it nicely. This is a position I am free to have as a member of the Church of Satan. I've made no secret about it. And I will offer my personal thoughts as to why. Likewise, as for Satanism and communism, is it technically possible to be both a Satanist and a communist, meaning your religion is Satanism, and additionally, your political views happen to be what would best be described as communism? The short answer is yes. The Church of Satan has no official political position. Satanism is a religion about the individual, not the collective. Church of Satan members span all sorts of demographics. Therefore, we do not all end up having the same exact interests and priorities. Therefore, we do not all end up with the same exact political views. This is something I covered in depth in Satansplain episode number 5. Some Satanists identify as liberal, some identify as conservative, some as libertarian, some vote Democrat, some vote Republican. Lots of Satanists don't even live in the United States, and thus those last few labels I listed don't apply, but maybe some other label does, some other political party or political affiliation. Some Satanists don't vote at all, and so on and so on. Thus, communism is just one of the many, many, many different political views that it is technically possible for a given Satanist to have, and that you may eventually run across a Satanist having. And I know such people do exist because I've met them. Now, do I personally like communism? The answer is no. To put it nicely, I am a capitalist. In fact, I hate communism, and I'll give my opinionated rant about that too. Well, that's the summary of this episode. Now then, notice that in both of these cases, with Temple of the Vampire and with communism, there is a difference between what I say as a representative of the Church of Satan and what I say as an individual member of the Church of Satan. This does not mean I am a hypocrite who believes in two different things. It's just that there is Church of Satan policy, meaning our position as an entire organization, and then there is Bill's personal opinion as a member of the Church of Satan. You would think that this difference is clear enough to understand, an official policy of an organization versus something individual members in that organization are allowed to have different opinions about. But like I said, there are people out there who unfortunately still don't get it. So before we even get into the details of the Vampire Temple or of communism, and my take on either of these as a Satanist, I'm going to talk first a little more about two more general things. One, what I just mentioned, the difference between me speaking as a magister on behalf of the Church of Satan and me giving you my personal opinion as a Satanist on some topic, especially if it's an opinion not necessarily shared by all members of the Church of Satan. And two, the fact that Satanism is a clearly defined religion, and me explaining what Satanism is and isn't, and correcting misinformation about Satanism, is not the same thing as me telling you what to do with your life. Before we go further, if you're listening to this on YouTube and you have not hit the like button yet, or you're following this from a social media post and have not clicked like on that yet, or whatever the equivalent is, please do so now, because that helps with the show. Which is a good segue to review what this show is all about. And again, to any of you regular listeners out there, you are going to hear me say some things you may have heard me say before. Fast forward if you really need to, but you may want to stick around and hear all this. You are listening to Satansplain. Satansplain is a podcast about Satanism. I am a Satanist, which is to say my religion is Satanism. Although the word Satanism has existed as a slur term for centuries, used by Christians to describe things they don't like, and although the word Satan itself is even thousands of years older than that, it was not until 1966, with the establishment of the Church of Satan, that an actual religion calling itself Satanism was founded. And when I say actual religion, I mean a religion that is codified. Not just a vague idea with a couple of platitudes written down, but a religion that is clearly defined, complete with not only its own philosophy, but also its own dogma, ethics code, symbols, ceremonies, and so on. The fact that it is a non-theistic religion does not change the fact that it is still a religion, because there are other examples of non-theistic religions out there. Theravada Buddhism, Jainism, Raelianism, and so on. These religions do not believe in a supernatural god of any sort, but they have those other types of components that I just listed, which all other religions do. I begin each and every episode of Satansplain with a pre-recorded 30-second description of Satanism. Since the establishment of the Church of Satan over 50 years ago, there have been various people here and there which have been labeled as Satanists or practicing Satanism, ranging from occultists to rock stars to politicians. Most of the time, these are people who don't even identify as Satanists in the first place. They're just the victims of ignorant Christians branding them as Satanists. Other times, they're people erroneously taking on the label of Satanism for themselves and throwing it on some unrelated belief system purely for the thrill of it. They just like the idea of calling themselves Satanists. And while rebellion and nonconformity are certainly themes within Satanism, it does not follow that Satanism is simply anything you want it to be. If it were, leaving no way to distinguish Satanism from not Satanism, then the term would be useless. For more about all of this, I suggest Satansplain episodes number 71 and 72. Now, the reason why I mentioned that last point is because Satanism naturally attracts a lot of people who are nonconformist by nature, and unfortunately, every now and then I will run into some newcomer who mistakes structure for conformity. They think that by me saying, no, Satanism is this and not that, that I somehow pose a threat to their personal liberty. A number of people have even accused me of being, quote, like a fanatical Christian, as if somehow pointing out people grossly misrepresenting my religion is the same thing as demanding they repent and believe in some set of ideas on blind faith. The underlying problem, as I see it with this whole argument, is it presumes there are two and only two options. Either Satanism means you're free to do anything you want, that you can believe or do anything and still use the label of Satanist for yourself, or Satanism has to be treated as some oppressive set of dogma that dictates how you have to live your life. Well, neither is true. In fact, this whole mentality is fallacious. It's a logical fallacy. It's the false dichotomy, or the black and white fallacy, to give it a formal name. The reality is that we have Satanism defined well enough so that we have working definitions and enough consistency for it to be a workable philosophy. But at the same time, there is more than enough room for personal expression and personal application. In fact, we encourage that. That's one of the paradoxes of Satanism. We say Satanism demands study, not worship. So you don't become a better Satanist through submission to Satanism itself. It's not like these spiritual religions where the more you grovel and submit, the more devout and pious you are. No, you live the philosophy and you improve yourself. You find your success. You find your indulgence. As we say in the Satanic Bible, it would be an oversimplification to say that every successful man and woman on earth is, without knowing it, a practicing Satanist, but the thirst for earthly success and its ensuing realization are certainly grounds for St. Peter turning thumbs down. So as a Satanist, as a Magister of the Church of Satan, as the well-versed host of a satanic podcast, can I dictate to you how you should be living your life as a fellow Satanist? The answer is no. As a Satanist, I am my own God. That doesn't mean I am your God, too. I think I do a good job of explaining what Satanism is and isn't. When I see something that objectively and unquestionably goes against satanic dogma, I can point it out and explain why that's the case. For example, a person who sacrifices animals and worships a supernatural deity is simply not practicing Satanism, no matter how much you may try to rationalize it. I can also help answer questions that fellow Satanists may have about certain topics, certain concepts LaVey or Gilmore may have written about. It's fine to have sincere questions like that. That's something I talked about in Satansplain episode number 1. I can also answer questions like, hey, Bill, what is your view as a Satanist on this event in the news? I can tell you about certain movies or entertainers or art that I find to be particularly satanic and explain why. Personally, I love hearing about those sorts of things from other Church of Satan members. I'll be talking with other members, whether it's online or at some private gathering in person, and somebody will say, hey, I just saw this movie and I thought it brilliantly touched upon these themes in pentagonal revisionism, and I found this character in the movie to be really satanic for these reasons, and I'll say, wow, that sounds great. I'll have to check that out. Of course, even then, I may not end up having the same take. I may end up finding the movie lame for other reasons. Maybe other Satanists will love it. It's okay. We're not going to necessarily agree on things beyond Satanism itself. Here's a good example. I myself am a lifelong fan of American comedian George Carlin. I found a lot of what he said to be philosophically satanic. I created a website, georgecarlin.net, and wrote about all of his albums, his books, his stand-up comedy specials. I've met lots and lots of other Satanists who feel the same way. George Carlin even gets a mention in the foreword list of praised names in the Satanic scriptures. And yet, I've also run into some Satanists who don't feel the same way, who just can't get into George Carlin. They don't care for him and his style of comedy. It's like with music. Like, geez, don't even get me started on that. Maybe the music you find satanic appeal in is something I can see and appreciate, or maybe it isn't. So, in summation, if you are a Satanist, then like me, you adhere to the same philosophy as me. Like me, your identified religion is Satanism. We both view the world through the lens of Satanism, but even so, we are two different individuals with two different sets of life circumstances and experiences and tastes. Thus, we're not always going to manifest Satanism in our lives in the same exact way. I am a representative of the Church of Satan. I can tell you what the Church of Satan is and isn't about. We can kick you out of the Church of Satan if most or all of what you're bringing to the table are terrible things, like if you're a violent criminal or an insufferable asshole to other members. Almost any organization, satanic or otherwise, I think would at least have some kind of reasonable standards like that. But regardless, the fact that I am a media representative does not mean every little opinion or personal opinion I have in life is part of some official policy of the Church of Satan. Again, I can tell you what Satanism itself is and isn't about. I can point you to resources for learning more. I can give you advice on certain topics as a fellow Satanist. I can tell you how Satanism manifests in my life, but I can't tell you how to live your life. That's not how Satanism works. You have to figure that out as your own God. Anyway, with that rant over, let's get to the emails. I've got an email from a listener who writes the following. Dear Magister Bill M., I know I've said this in other emails, but I can't thank you enough for your podcast, Satansplain, which has been great for getting a source to cite official COS positions from in online debates. Also, it is one of my favorite podcasts, and I love every episode. Well, you're very welcome. Thank you for the praise. I would say, though, that if you are really trying to cite an official COS position, it's probably best to find a relevant article from churchofsatan.com and then maybe in addition supply a relevant episode of Satansplain. But anyway, now my question. I wanted to have your and the COS's position whether one can be a communist and a Satanist at the same time. Is there an official COS position on that topic? Over the last few months, I've had several discussions on this topic with Satanists online, one on Reddit, and two on Discord, so you can imagine the quality of the discussions. And they were all basically arguing that in a hypothetical, perfect communist world, everybody would be happy, and since they are part of this world, they'd be so happy, and that's why they choose communism over capitalism. Also, one was saying that capitalism enslaves individuals to be part of companies and work like machines. Now, I hate communism as much as you do, Bill, and I've listened to your episode on objectivism and know that the COS has no official position on economics or politics, but I'd still argue that one could not be a Satanist and a communist, or a fascist for that matter, at the same time, because these systems put the collective over the individual, and I reject that as a Satanist. A system like communism is suppressing the potential of the individual and helps the weak at the expense of the strong and intelligent people, which in my opinion is not very fair or satanic. Being for a system that promotes total equality, as in forced equity, and is going to take the property of more successful people than me and give that to me without me having to do something for it is, in my opinion, not compatible with Satanism, because we advocate personal responsibility, self-interest, and do not think that all people are equal or deserve equality. What are your thoughts on this? Am I missing something? I want to clarify that I definitely think that socialism can be satanic and laissez-faire capitalist society isn't the only satanic option. I just reject the extreme, communism. So I plan on using your reply to this in online debates. So if you were to produce an episode of Satansplain on this topic, I would ask you not to mention my name if possible. Okay, that's the end of the email. The first question was, is there an official Church of Satan position on whether a Satanist can be a communist? Meaning, can somebody whose religion is Satanism additionally have political convictions that they would describe as communism? As I said earlier, the short answer is yes. As for an official source for this answer, I would direct you to the Church of Satan's policy on politics. You can find this document on churchofsatan.com. You can hear me read it and comment on it all the way back in Satansplain episode number 5. But to try to sum it up, the Church of Satan does not endorse any particular political ideology, and that is as it should be, because Satanism is a religion that serves the self, not the masses. Satanists come from all sorts of different demographics, different ages, different sexes, races, sexual orientations, different occupations, different economic classes. Some Satanists are handicapped, some are able-bodied, some live in the country, some live in the city, some have children, some don't have children, and we don't even all live in the United States. So the bottom line is that we would not expect all Satanists to end up having the same political convictions. Thus, the Church of Satan does not endorse any particular politician or party or what have you. Not to mention that if a politician or political party got an official endorsement from the Church of Satan, how on earth would that help them? We are the bad guys. Duh. I mean, we take no shame in being Satanists, but we accept the reality of choosing a deliberately off-putting identity. The reasons why we call it Satanism are, of course, answered in the introduction of Satansplain, the pre-recorded 30-second introduction to Satansplain I play every episode. Now, having said all of that, let's get back to the question. Can a Satanist also be a communist? Can a Satanist have political convictions that he or she would describe accurately as communism? The short answer is yes. If you look at the article I just mentioned on Church of Satan's policy on politics, it directly quotes another article written by Church of Satan's High Priest, Magus Peter H. Gilmore, an article called Map for the Misdirected, where he says, quote, "Our memberships span an amazing political spectrum, which includes, but is not limited to," and then he goes on to list almost 20 different things: Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, Liberals, Conservatives, Anarchists, Capitalists, Socialists, and yes, communists are in that long list of examples too. So yes, it is entirely possible to be a Satanist and a communist because such people exist. I have even run into some myself. I have talked to many Church of Satan members over the years whom I've met both online and offline, and I have run into at least 2 or 3 members who stated that they identify as communist, just as I've run into other members who identified as capitalists or any of those other labels I just rattled off a minute ago. Oh, and in the off chance that there is some really brain-dead Christian listening right now who has no grasp on logic and thinks that I just said that Satanists are communists or that Satanism is inherently linked to communism, let me clarify again, no, that's not what I said at all. The fact that some Satanists who are communists exist does not mean that all Satanists are communists, nor that all communists are Satanists. Just throwing that in there in case I get some idiot reacting to the headline of this show without listening. But I digress. Let's move on. Now, this listener does, however, bring up another question which I think is valid. To Satanists like myself and he or she, who would identify as capitalists, among other things, communism seems antithetical to Satanism. I'm going to be perfectly blunt. I abhor communism. I don't just hate it, I abhor it. I am a capitalist. I am shamelessly a capitalist. I embrace stratification. I embrace meritocracy. And some of the reasons why I abhor communism are things that this listener already pointed out. I see absolutely no moral justification for forcibly taking something of mine and giving it to somebody who isn't trading me anything in return. Likewise, I don't feel I'm entitled to other people's stuff just because they have more than me, and I reject efforts that would try to put a limit on how much individual success or wealth I can have in life. So, like this listener who wrote in, I likewise see some ideological contradictions there between Satanism and communism. In fact, I will go you one further, because at this point, I don't care if what I'm about to say shocks and offends people. I'm going to state the following personal opinion for the record, even if some communists will no doubt ignore the rest of what I'm saying and try to isolate this clip as some kind of lame gotcha. But fuck it, here's what I have to say. I hate Marxism so much that if I had to choose between living in a country ruled by Christian theocracy and living in a country that was a complete Marxist or even Leninist communism country, I would choose the theocracy. Yeah. Oh, sure, it would suck. Both options suck. Both are dystopian. In a Christian theocracy, I would have to hide my books. I would have to be in the closet as a Satanist. It would be tough to get good porn. But at least I wouldn't have to wait on government breadlines for food. At least I could run my businesses and run my farm and not be forced to give half of my shit to people who didn't do anything to earn it. I'd have to be in the metaphorical closet to enjoy my possessions, but at least I would have personal possessions, things that belonged to me, not the state. I would still have the option of working to make more money than I need and getting what I want. At least meritocracy would still exist. I'd have to put up with seeing crucifixes in every public room, so be it. It would be super lame, but whatever, I survived Catholic school. By the way, while I have certainly had Christians harass me and attempt to dox me for being a Satanist, the number of so-called anti-fascists who've tried to do that to me outnumber those Christians by far. If you'd like to see some direct examples of what Marxists in the US are up to, don't listen to conservative shows or watch channels like Libs of TikTok. They're just regurgitating the same talking points without doing any actual research. Kamala Harris is not a Marxist. Joe Biden is not a Marxist. Just as Trump is not a Nazi. There are real neo-Nazis, but they hate Trump. Just as there are real Marxists, but they are not fans of Biden-Harris. So don't listen to CNN to try to find out what real fascists are up to. Likewise, don't listen to Fox News to try to find out what real Marxists are up to. Instead, for the latter, I would suggest Dr. Karlyn Borisenko. DrKarlynB. Look up that handle on YouTube. Check out her channel. She is ruthless, but she is miles ahead of the conservatives on exposing Marxism, and she only uses direct evidence. It's funny, though, because we've seen the Church of Satan get attacked from both fascists as well as from Marxists, and the people who do this from either group are just rabidly irrational and obsessive in how they go about it. The fascists show up en masse on social media to say, Anton LaVey was a Jew. Your religion is really Judaism. You agree with the Talmud. You're Jews. I mean, imagine how much of an anti-Semite you have to be to think that by linking Jews to Satanists, it smears Satanists. Let that sink in. Likewise, the Marxists, or anti-fascists as they often call themselves, will point to lines from Ragnar Redbeard's Might is Right, showing up in the Satanic Bible, and accuse us of being Nazis. Well, which is it? Are we evil Zionists, or are we evil Nazis? Both accusations can't be correct, but they can both be wrong. It seems clear to me that both of these groups thrive on a boogeyman, and they want to feel better about themselves by associating humanity's ultimate boogeyman, Satan, with the boogeyman of their ideology. These people are nuts, but I do think it's a modern example of satanic statement number 9. Oh, and if you are a communist listening who is thinking, well, Bill, you don't understand what real communism is and what its benefits are. Yes, I do. I do understand. And frankly, I don't give a fuck what your justification is. I reject your political ideology, and I have zero interest in hearing how you personally justify it with Satanism or why you like it, just as there are Satanists who listen to certain bands I can't fucking stand, or eat foods that I don't like. I like what I like, you like what you like, and if it's something I hate, then I don't have any desire to listen to your justification. Leave me the fuck out of it. Now, that whole rant I just gave is not some official Church of Satan stance. That is just my opinion as an individual Satanist. So, this then begs the following question. How does a Satanist communist resolve what, to my mind, and to this listener's mind, are inherent contradictions? My answer to that is I don't know. You would have to find a Satanist who identifies politically as a communist and then ask him or her why they find communism to be the political stance that's ultimately in their own self-interest as a Satanist. Now notice I don't jump to the conclusion that any Satanist who is a communist must be absolutely mistaken and a hypocrite. No, as Satanists, we do all subscribe to the same philosophy. But like I said, we have different needs and different life experiences, and as much as I personally despise communism, still, I accept the fact that there exists some Satanists who have come to a different conclusion on this topic. Once again, I don't know how they resolve these two ideas. Perhaps they likewise don't understand how I can be a Satanist and a capitalist. Maybe they think I'm the big hypocrite, or at least misinformed. However, if I had to make an educated guess, putting all of my biases aside, if I had to make an educated guess on how a Satanist might resolve Satanism with communism, perhaps they divide the world into one group who is the establishment and the bureaucracy, the bourgeoisie, the man, if you will. And that's also where you find the institutions like spiritual religions, which have systematically oppressed people for centuries, and therefore, in the satanic spirit of nonconformity and rebellion and chaos, workers of the world unite, etc., etc., they see Satanism as being more like the rebellious proletariat. Again, this is purely a guess from my part. I still wholeheartedly reject communism. I don't care what another Satanist justification may be for communism, just as, again, I don't care in hearing a Satanist justify why they like certain foods that I hate or like certain music I can't stand. But going back to communism, as for this claim that, quote, in a perfect communist world, everybody would be happy. Well, I would argue that this is what every ideology claims about themselves. We hear that from everybody. You know, if everybody would just follow this model, all of our problems would go away. Even as a Satanist, I suppose I could argue that most of the world's problems would go away if people abided by the 11 satanic rules of the earth and avoided the 9 satanic sins, but I don't kid myself into thinking that's going to happen anytime soon. You know, again, every ideology is convinced that they have some model that's ultimately in the best interest for everybody to follow. But the problem with the notion of just follow this and everything will work out is that to get people to that point, you have to do some enforcement of whatever those rules are, and that typically makes the situation miserable for everybody else. I am reminded of one of my favorite quotations from comedian George Carlin. And that quotation is, if you think there's a solution, you're part of the problem. So let me state this again. As much as I personally hate communism, I accept the fact that there are other Satanists who don't feel the same way, and that's fine. People in the Church of Satan, some of them. I do not jump to the conclusion that they must be stupid, or that they didn't put any thought into their decision, or that they're inferior Satanists compared to me. I'm sure they do have their reasons. Everybody has their reasons for their own political views. I can put aside my biases and make a guess as to what those reasons may be, just as I can put aside my personal tastes and make an educated guess as to why some Satanists might like certain types of music I find terrible. But in all cases, it would be just me speculating, and to learn what their real reasons are, you would have to ask one of them, not me. As a Church of Satan representative, I can tell you what the Church of Satan does and does not stand for. I can tell you what Satanism is and isn't, as far as what has been objectively defined and declared in Satanism. As a Satanist, I can speak for myself on how I have implemented Satanism in my life and tell you what I see in the world as viewed through the lens of Satanism. But I can't tell you how each and every Satanist individually applies Satanism in their lives or dictate how that should be done. Let's take a break, and when we come back, answering questions about Temple of the Vampire. Stay tuned, you are listening to Satansplain.
You are listening to Satansplain, real satanic talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M. For questions, comments, and correspondence, send an email to bill@satansplain.com.
Do satanic cults lurk in the shadows? Can memories of satanic ritual abuse be repressed? Do exorcisms really drive out demons? And are those demons always possessing Zach Baggins? I'm JD Sword, the Satanic Skeptic. Join me on The Devil in the Details as I examine these questions and more, bringing a skeptical and satanic perspective to the paranormal. The Devil in the Details, available on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, and more.
Handmade, all-natural, botanical perfumes, soaps, and ceremonial incense, sculptures and jewelry to adorn yourself and your other altars. All this and more await you at moonandsunemporium.com. Ritual perfumes and other occult fine art luxuries, created and curated by me, Priestess Sarah Josephine Clark, with tarot readings by Reverend Dr. Dylan Clark. moonandsunemporium.com.
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. Visit the main website for the show at satansplain.com. There you can find every Satansplain episode. You can also listen to Satansplain on Spotify, YouTube, Audible, and a host of other places. If you're on social media, please give Satansplain a like and a follow, or whatever the equivalent is, on Facebook, X, and YouTube. Likewise, if you are listening now on YouTube, don't forget to hit that like button for this episode if you have not done so already. For all questions and correspondence, email me directly. The email address is bill@satansplain.com. If you enjoy Satansplain and would like to support the show, please go to the show's page on Locals. Point your web browsers to satansplain.locals.com. You can sign up for Locals for free, but you can also additionally become a paid subscriber there. We also have a merch store. You can go to store.satansplain.com for that. And thank you, as always, to all of you who support the show in one way or another. It's been a while, I think, since we've done a satanic anecdote, and I think this would be a good segue into talking about Temple of the Vampire. So here's a satanic anecdote from me, which means it's time for a Satanecdote. Cue the Satanecdote theme song.
Satanic anecdotes. Satanecdotes.
So this satanic anecdote happened to be on Facebook back in 2019. It happened to me. One of the groups that I help admin on Facebook is a discussion group for the Church of Satan. And one day I got a message from this guy named John. He asked if it would be okay to post something in the group about Temple of the Vampire. So that's good. He wants to check with an admin of the group before he goes in posting something. So I replied with, well, as much as I personally dislike Temple of the Vampire, sure, go ahead. It doesn't break any of the rules to post something there. Thanks for asking. So we exchange a couple more messages. He posts his thread about Temple of the Vampire. I read it. I reply back to that thread with my thoughts on what he wrote. And my thoughts were, let's say, on the more critical side. So he then messages me back to say, are you an official member of the Church of Satan? I say, yes. I currently hold the title of Magister in the organization. Of course, not all Church of Satan members have the same views as I do regarding Temple of the Vampire. He says, anyone can claim to be a member of the Church of Satan. Can you provide evidence? I say, sure. You can go to the Church of Satan website. You can find some essays of mine, written by me, Bill M. I've also been hosting a podcast on Radio Free Satan since 2003. So yeah, this was before I started Satansplain. You can find some interviews with me online as well. So as for proving to you that I am indeed the same person, well, you could follow the links from any of those places that go back to one of my websites. Contact me through any of my websites by sending an email, and I can reply back and say, hi, yes, that is me, the same Bill that you just talked to in Facebook Messenger. So you would think that this would be the end of it. That would be evidence enough. But no. He replies back with, I asked for evidence. I said, well, I just gave you the means by which you could get evidence to confirm who I am. If that's not good enough for you, then what would you accept as an example of evidence that I am really Bill M. of the Church of Satan? He said, a picture or a scan of your Church of Satan membership card. I said, okay, let's say I stupidly go ahead with this request of yours. How would you know I didn't just find a picture of somebody else's card and photoshopped my name onto it? He says, I will be contacting the administration of the Church of Satan to verify the details. I sat back and I said, please do. Can you explain why you have an anti-vampire temple agenda? I didn't think merely having an opinion constituted an agenda, I told him. I gave you a summary of my reasons why I reject Temple of the Vampire. It's not like I'm the only Church of Satan member who feels the way I do. I asked you about the temple in a private message and you did not answer. Then you made a negative comment about the temple in public. That is the very definition of agenda. I find it hard to believe you are, in fact, a magister of the Church of Satan. I said, well, I certainly believe you are a member of Vampire Temple. Will you provide your COS membership number for identification? Okay, I said, even if I were to agree to give that to you, there are two problems with that. One, you don't need the number to verify that the person you're talking to from this Facebook account and the person who does the podcasts and articles and interviews as Magister Bill M are the same person. And two, by the time I dig out my card and give you the number, the central office will probably have gotten back to you anyway. And although it's against COS policy to disclose who is and isn't a member, I just contacted the central office myself and I told them that they'll be expecting a message from you asking to confirm my identity. And I told them they may go ahead and do so. Now, after you confirm my identity, are we done? Yeah, sure. I've just received verification of your membership. The COS wrote back to me and said, Magister Bill M is one of our most respected members. All right, well, there you go. But he messages me again later. Are you acting as a representative? Okay, so apparently we're not done. We were not done. He asks, is this your personal opinion or are you representing the COS in this? I said, like I already told you in an earlier message, quote, of course, not all COS members necessarily hold the same views regarding TOV. Nice try. And finally he ends with, I am most satisfied with your response. Thank you for your time. All right, you're welcome, Count Dorkula. All right, let's move on to the actual email I received. I actually received more than one email on this topic, but Gage wrote to me, and he says, Howdy, Magister Bill. I've been curious about the Temple of the Vampire for some time now, but I've found it somewhat difficult to find information on them outside of their website. The Temple of Set apparently also has some affiliation with some other group calling themselves Temple of the Vampire, making things all the more challenging. I'm not asking you for a complete history of the group, but have you knowingly interacted with any members? What do you think of this group? Why is the Church of Satan affiliated with them and vice versa? I have my own theories, but I think you're the guy to ask. I wrote back to Gage, What I pointed out first is that Temple of the Vampire, Church of Satan, and Temple of Set are three completely different and distinct organizations. And as I'm sure you already know, the Church of Satan was founded in 1966, and, I won't bother to repeat everything I said earlier in this episode about the Church of Satan and founding Satanism as an actual religion. Temple of Set was founded about a decade later in the mid-1970s by some disgruntled members of the Church of Satan who had beliefs in supernatural deities and other beliefs inherently in conflict with Satanism, so they left and founded what is simply a different religion, Satanism. I talk more about all of that in Satansplain episode number 67. Temple of the Vampire is none of the above. It's true that there are some people who hold membership in both the Temple of the Vampire and the Church of Satan. That includes the head of the Temple of the Vampire himself, who, in addition to heading the Temple of the Vampire, also happens to be a Church of Satan Magister, Church of Satan Magister Nemo. And no, Nemo didn't choose his pseudonym after the cartoon fish. It's a reference to Captain Nemo of the story 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Anyway, coincidentally enough, before Nemo was ever in the Church of Satan, he was a member of the Temple of Set for 3 years. You can read one of his essays on churchofsatan.com, where he talks about how it was basically 3 years of his life wasted in esoteric spiritual nonsense. In fact, I know of one or two people who are not only members of the Church of Satan and Temple of the Vampire, but are also ex-members of Temple of Set. Obviously, being Satanists, they have a different set of beliefs than they had back when they were in the Temple of Set. But as for the question of how all three organizations relate to each other, that's what I would say. Temple of the Vampire is run by somebody who coincidentally happens to be a Church of Satan member, and once upon a time was a member of the Temple of Set. Now, whether there are Temple of the Vampire members who are also current members of the Temple of Set, I don't know. Maybe. In any case, they certainly wouldn't be Church of Satan members. So is it okay for somebody to be a member of both the Church of Satan and Temple of the Vampire? The answer is yes, obviously. In fact, to expand on this with something I mentioned in Satansplain episode number 28, if you are a member of the Church of Satan, we say you're pretty much free to join any other additional organization if you want, with two notable exceptions: criminal groups and pseudo-satanic groups. So, one, we don't want you affiliating with us if you're going to affiliate with some criminal organization too. If you're a member of a street gang or some organized crime group or some protest group like the Animal Liberation Front who firebombs factories that make fur coats or whatever, we say to you, no thanks, we don't want you. We have enough fake accusations of illegal activity we have to put up with, being that we're Satanists. We don't need the extra headache. And like I said, pseudo-satanic organizations, if you want to join the Church of Satan while simultaneously try to hold membership in some so-called satanic group that fancies themselves a replacement for the Church of Satan, or bashes the Church of Satan, or bashes Anton LaVey, or stupidly tries to be some kind of Satanism ecumenical group, then no. What are you even doing? So the Temple of Set falls into the second category. They're a pseudo-satanic group, really, as do a couple of other dozen sad groups I could name off the top of my head. Temple of the Vampire, however, does not fit into either of those two categories. They are not a criminal group, and they are not a pseudo-satanic group. They do not have an axe to grind with the Church of Satan, nor do they try to be some sort of new satanic organization to replace us. So, Church of Satan members are free to have membership in Temple of the Vampire, just as Church of Satan members are free to join American Legion, or Mensa, or the 4-H Club, or National Honor Society, the Moose Lodge, whatever. In all these cases, there's nothing these groups believe or do that inherently contradicts Satanism, so far as I know. Never mind the fact that, again, they don't have some kind of axe to grind with the Church of Satan. Now, I am friends with quite a few members of Temple of the Vampire, and they are all friends I've met through the Church of Satan. Of course, not all members of Temple of the Vampire are Satanists, let alone members of the Church of Satan, and likewise, of course, not all members of the Church of Satan are in Temple of the Vampire. As a Satanist, however, you may be networking with other Satanists, like on social media, and somehow or somewhere, this name Temple of the Vampire shows up in somebody's profile. So here are my thoughts on Temple of the Vampire. Let's call them TOV for short. To put it bluntly, I reject TOV. This is not something I've made any secret about. As for the question of whether I've interacted with any members, the answer is yes. I've met quite a few of them in person over the years. There are some I consider to be good friends. They know where I stand on this. I know where they stand, and we leave it at that. I do not give them a hard time for choosing to be in the TOV, just as I don't go around harassing Church of Satan members or accusing them of being inferior Satanists for having different political views than me or different hobbies than me. Like I said earlier, two Church of Satan members can have extremely different opinions on a topic, have their own satanic justifications for those positions, why it's self-serving, and even get into a heated debate about it. They may even hate each other as individuals and block each other on social media. That doesn't mean Satanism is in crisis, or that we have some religious contradiction we have to resolve, or that there's some great schism in the Church of Satan. No, you can have two people who know Satanism and live it and have disagreements on these sorts of things that lie outside of Satanism itself. By the way, there's still a difference between that sort of disagreement and bitching and moaning in public about other Church of Satan members, especially by name. Now, notice that in my whole rant earlier about communism, I didn't say, oh, look at this Church of Satan member and this other Church of Satan member who say they're communists. They're stupid and I hate them. There's a difference between a Satanist having a different opinion from another Satanist and just gossiping and airing your dirty laundry. That's something we don't need in the Church of Satan. You can make a point without being a he said, she said drama queen about it. That's a whole different topic that probably deserves its own Satansplain episode, but I felt that little side rant just now was worth making. Anyway, let's move on. As for what Temple of the Vampire, or TOV for short, are all about, I suppose I would first describe them as a secretive society, meaning that they have certain bits of literature and other information that you can't see unless you've been initiated to certain ranks. We see this sort of thing in fraternal organizations, which I covered in episode number 26 of Satansplain. And note that the Church of Satan is not a secret society nor an initiatory organization. As a magister, for example, I don't have some sort of special access to secret satanic literature or secret ritual relics or whatever. I have access to the same books any other member would, or that anybody can buy from the Barnes & Noble site. But one thing I do know about Temple of the Vampire is that, as a matter of policy, they do not discuss the organization with non-members outside of their own official online message board. Last I checked, that was still their policy. So, Gage, if you're having trouble trying to find out what these people are all about, given that you have to join them to see their full literature, and they won't talk about themselves outside of their website's official message board, well, you're hardly the first person to have that difficulty. Fortunately, TOV does give some information about themselves on their official website. Personally, I would say a lot of it comes across to me as poetically vague, but more on that later. My own first introduction to Temple of the Vampire was in 1991. This was still years before I had really discovered Satanism myself, but I was into some strange stuff, and I had a subscription to a magazine called Fate magazine, It was a magazine on all sorts of strange phenomena, UFOs, voodoo, New Age stuff, and so on. My favorite part of the magazine were the classified ads in the back, because that's where you found some of the really strange stuff, like people offering newsletters or witchcraft kits or dowsing tools and so on. And I would see an ad in multiple issues that simply said, "Vampires exist. Join us. For more information, send $5 to," and it gave some mailing address. This was all pre-internet, folks. Now, my girlfriend's best friend at the time was obsessed with vampires, so I showed this to her, and she really wanted to know what this was all about. So we sent in the money and got back a big newsletter. From what I recall, it was pretty much what you see today on their website, their basic beliefs and stuff. I remember reading it all at the time and thinking, well, this is interesting. I agree with this part and this part. I don't agree, though, with that part and that other part. Well, overall, interesting take, but no thanks. So as for what they believe, you can read their creed on their website. Just to read you the first few lines: "I am a vampire. I worship my ego and I worship my life, for I am the only God that is. I am proud that I am a predatory animal, and I honor my animal instincts. I exalt my rational mind and hold no belief that is in defiance of reason. I recognize the difference between the worlds of truth and fantasy. I acknowledge the fact that survival is the highest law," and it goes on and on from there. But right away, I can see how all of this is compatible with Satanism. There are the notions here of the self being the God, of also acknowledging that as a human, you are also an animal, which extends to notions like the survival drive, also concepts like rational skepticism. And granted, there's still much more to Satanism than what I just listed, but again, I see the compatibility between the two. Regarding the survival part, the impression I get is Temple of the Vampire tries extending this particular concept and relates it to being a vampire. That is, being immortal. Now, I know that members of Temple of the Vampire don't literally believe themselves to be immortal, like they could jump off a skyscraper and survive. But I have often seen them use taglines like, "Do you want to live forever?" and concepts like indefinite life extension, trying to put off death for as long as possible. Okay, fine. That's an interesting modern philosophical take on being a vampire. Again, I also see the compatibility with Satanism. It doesn't necessarily mean all Satanists want that, of course. In addition to the creed, they have what's called the vampire test. There are 5 questions they present. Do you tend to think for yourself rather than accept the opinions of others? Do you tend to trust your own experience, even when others disagree with you? Do you tend to expect that life is worth living, rather than an endless burden to endure? If you won the lottery, would that probably make you feel happy instead of guilty? Do you tend to value your own life and those you love more than the lives of others? So those are the 5 questions. And they say if you answered yes to all of them, congratulations, you may in fact be one of us. Okay, well, first of all, I would think that somebody who has any interest at all in the first place in something like Temple of the Vampire is naturally going to be a person on the more esoteric and introverted side, in which case they're likely to agree with these sorts of things. In fact, I don't know anybody, introverted or extroverted, who would say they don't think for themselves or don't trust their experiences, because even people who are, really sheep, are people who are not free thinkers. They still fancy themselves as free thinkers. Nobody thinks of themselves as a sheep, whether or not it's true. As for the last 3 questions, I would think they weed out a lot of maybe mopey people with low self-esteem. Okay. So the second vampire test is another set of questions. Can you sometimes actually feel the emotional power of a large crowd? Have you ever somehow felt when someone was staring at you from behind? Have you ever felt more energized after being around someone who is very outgoing? Can you sometimes feel a tingling vibration in your fingers when you think about them? Do you think there may be more to reality than science currently assumes there to be? Okay, well again, I suspect the sort of person who'd get this far into this website would answer yes to these questions. In fact, maybe even most people would probably answer yes to some or all of these questions. Some of them are psychologically suggestive, I would say. Lots of people have experienced things like the feeling they were being stared at. It's a phenomenon that may be worth exploring, especially from a satanic lesser magic perspective. But I would say it doesn't necessarily mean there's anything supernatural about it, of course. So it goes on to say, if you agreed with each of those 5 statements, well, they were questions, not statements, but anyway, if you agree, then congratulations, you share many of the views of the second level of our religion. To attain this level, a member has tested and verified the existence of an invisible energy that all living things are constantly radiating. Vampires absorb this life force from living human beings. This action causes no harm and can potentially even stimulate healing. Now on to level 3. Okay, no. Stop right there. This shit is where they really start to lose me. This just sounds like New Age pseudoscience bullshit to me. But let me give the benefit of the doubt here. Do living things have an energy? Well, yeah. Everything has energy in some form or another, as we know from physics. We also know that there's some sort of bioelectrical energy in living things. LaVey even inserts a few speculations about this in the Satanic Bible. Fine. But back to vampire test number 2. Is there any truth to any of this? Well, I suppose psychologically and symbolically speaking, there's something to be said about feeding off another person's energy in terms of their personality and stamina. We may say, hey, this person radiates confidence, or this person is just miserable to be around. And so, yeah, I guess I can understand how you could take that to a more esoteric level, but it's still symbolism to me. Test 3 goes on to ask, do you think ESP might be real? How about near-death experiences or out-of-the-body experiences? Do you think that such psychic powers might possibly be better controlled and developed? Do you think there might have been at least some people in history who did it? Well, my personal answers to these questions is no. I could spend a whole episode talking about science that debunks the notion of out-of-the-body experiences, or how attempted feats of displaying psychic powers fail scientific tests of probability. This doesn't mean that you can't have a strange, subjective experience that holds personal meaning for you. But again, I don't see any evidence of these things from an objective standpoint. Michael Shermer is an author I would suggest for more of this. And there are countless anecdotes out there of somebody experiencing some allegedly psychic thing, but I believe what Anton LaVey proposed about these sorts of things in The Satanic Witch. In that book of his, The Satanic Witch, he argues that most of these experiences that people credit to ESP are not really a sixth sense, but can be explained as rather subconsciously picked up things by the other 5 senses. There is an entire chapter in The Satanic Witch titled ESP, which does not stand for extrasensory perception, but rather extrasensual projection. And LaVey goes on in this chapter to talk about what these sorts of subliminal cues might be and how to apply them to influence a person without them knowing it. Again, nothing supernatural about it, but there are roundabout ways of getting the same results in the real world. I'm not going to bother with the other levels of questions. You can go to their website yourself and read them if you want. But to me, it really just comes off as more New Age woo-woo crap. Which is interesting when you consider that the motto of TOV is test everything, believe nothing. I've run into Temple of the Vampire members who seem to have a real hang-up over this word believe or belief. I've run across Satanists, too, who seem really hung up on it. They'll say, beliefs, no. I don't have beliefs. Beliefs require faith. I am skeptical. I only accept what is empirically verified. Yeah, okay, I get that. But personally, I don't take the word so literally. Anton LaVey certainly didn't take the word belief or believe literally. He uses it all over the Satanic Bible. For example, the Satanist believes you should love strongly and completely those who deserve your love. The Satanist believes in complete gratification of his ego, and so on. So this hang-up over the word belief that some other people have just seems to be more of a nitpicky semantics argument to me. But the motto, test everything, believe nothing, to me, personally, again, this is just my opinion, just comes off as this kind of smug, non-committal thing. It's like the people who call themselves agnostics because they think they're in this superior position of, well, I don't know everything and neither do you, so I'm taking the only intellectually honest position, unlike you. Which is convenient because if you don't commit to anything or make any stances on anything, nobody can call you wrong about anything. And of course, agnosticism and atheism are not mutually exclusive. I talked all about that in Satansplain episode number 16. On top of all that, though, I don't necessarily see a lot of these people in Temple of the Vampire following this motto. For example, I had a Facebook friend, I will not say who, but like a lot of people on social media, she would share all of these clickbait articles without reading them or verifying if they were really true. Now, granted, we've all fallen for one of these articles at some point or another. You read a headline that really triggers your emotional biases, and it's a story you automatically want to be true, and it's tough to slam on the brakes of skepticism and say, okay, well, wait a minute. Is this really true? Is this a completely made-up story? Or maybe it's partially true? Or is the headline completely misleading and the article actually says something else? And like I said, we've all fallen for things like that at one time or another. I've certainly fallen for some of these clickbait news headlines myself. I'll admit it. But don't tell me that your life's motto is test everything, believe nothing when you believe everything that comes across your political echo chamber feed on Facebook and test none of it. Never mind that I have to wonder just how much you've applied this testing to these notions of psychic powers and vampire energy and the like. I'm going to finish my rant about Temple of the Vampire by saying that although I have my criticisms of them, I still totally understand the appeal. There are people out there who feel like outsiders. They feel that they don't relate to much of the herd of humanity, but paradoxically wouldn't mind finding a place where they can feel at home, or at the very least wouldn't mind finding some like-minded people they can have some meaningful conversations with, because they have some shared interests or shared principles that most other people don't. Some of these people I described are certainly Satanists. Others might find an identity in some other offbeat religion or subculture. These days, a lot of them go the route of political activism and identity politics. Regardless, nonconformist or not, people are trying to find answers, or at least some kind of guidelines or views they can work off of. Now, on top of all that, I realize that Temple of the Vampire has the added appeal of mystique. Vampire, and they're also saying you might be part of a special tribe and not even know it yet. And it's something that relates to the vampire. We have a secret. Do you want in? And there is most certainly an esoteric appeal to secrets for the sake of secrets. There is a psychological power in and of itself, I would say, in knowing certain secrets or symbols or rituals that only a select few know about, even if those secrets are something that's mundane and completely meaningless outside of the group, like a secret handshake or a secret ritual prop. I totally get the appeal of that stuff. That's why I joined a fraternity in college. Because you see, you can have that fun of secrecy and ritual and stuff without the mysticism. And that's my overall take on Temple of the Vampire. Once again, my personal opinion, definitely not one shared by every member of the Church of Satan, and that's okay. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to my Satanist friends who happen to be in Temple of the Vampire, or happen to have completely different political views than me, well, we're still Satanists, which means we still have way more philosophy in common than we have in disagreement. So thank you for listening. Until next time, hail Satan.
You have been listening to Satansplain. For more information about the show, visit the official website at Satansplain.com. And for more information on Satanism itself, visit churchofsatan.com. This episode is copyright 2024, Magister Bill M.